Hey there everybody, Cindy Dajak with Queen Bee Creations. Welcome to the channel. If you are returning, thanks so much for checking us out again. And if you are new, we sure hope that you like what you see and you come back again. Hit subscribe if so, and check in on all the other future projects that we come up with. Today's project is kind of inspired by two things. One, the new release of the IOD Frames mold. Now there's also a cameo mold, and the two of these work beautifully together. But what I wanted to do was kind of use some of the frames in a slightly different way. And it was also sort of inspired by this find of mine at the thrift store. So beautiful, beautiful old frame. And so we're going to use this with the frames mold. So we're going to be doing major frames, frames within frames. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to kind of pop this backing paper, cut this off, and kind of get into the insides of this. Which I guess, so here's the thing. Technically, I actually don't need to go in here because I could just do this project, what I have in mind, right on top of the glass. But a client of mine was in, she loves the picture, and when she found out I was going to be taking that picture out, or not using that picture, I said that I would take it out for her and then she could have it. So we're adding a step in. Mark, this is for you. To get in here, easiest is just to use, I always want to call this a spatula. You can tell that I grew up in a kitchen, not in a tool space. So, can't even think of the real name for it. So I'm using this guy. And this one happens to be really stiff. I've got some that are very flexible. This one is very stiff, and it just works a treat for doing things like this. So I'm just lifting up all those elements to be able to get the picture out, and then I'm just going to flatten them out again. So again, this isn't something that you need to do. Well, that's right on the board. Okay, so Mark, honey, sorry, I need the board, and it's glued. It's glued down. So you're out of luck, and I'm just putting it all back. For this project, we are actually just going to be painting right over the glass. And because I am going to be using DIY paint, so Debbie's Design Diary, which is a clay-based paint, it paints over virtually anything. So metals and glass and any items like that. It sticks to and adheres to just great. So that's why I'm just leaving my glass intact, and it'll be a better surface than the piece of, dropping in a piece of cardboard or something. So all right, so before I start painting, I want to add my other frame in. So what I'm looking at doing, and this particular frame, you could just use the frame part and just have that border, just have the frame. You could just use that kind of medallion section on its own. Or you could use a combination of the two. I'm going to use the combination of the two. So what I'm looking at doing is adding this whole framed cameo into this area. So I'll have a little bit of a border of the painted glass showing, then I'll have the border of this. So it's like a frame with, because this is almost like two frames, right? You've got this frame design and this outside. And now we're adding the third rectangular frame, and then that kind of almost frame around that little cameo piece. So Super cool. So I want to get that all added in and glued up before I start any of the painting. So I'm just taking my IOD air dry clay and just keep it sealed up in a bag. Because this particular mold is sort of like two, I'm going to do them in two pieces and glue them in. And the other thing that I'm doing, because they're fairly detailed, and I'd like the frame especially to come out easily so that when I'm trying to remove it, I don't skew it or stretch it in any way. I am just brushing in some cornstarch. And this just helps serve as a bit of a resist, that when my clay goes in, I have a greater likelihood of it coming out still showing all that awesome detail. And you know, like this little frame right beside it is, especially look at all those beautiful little curlicues. You're gonna wanna get all of that detail out. So cornstarch is your friend, not flour. Flour will get gummy, and that's what we would like to avoid. But all that we're gonna do is take our clay, and because I'm looking at a border, and this particular frame has that patented micro rim on both sides, so it's gonna help me get a nice crisp straight edge along both sides of the frame. And you just kind of push against it, use it as kind of like your cutting tool. And I just find it easiest to do kind of a little bit like a tube when I'm looking to do a straight line like this. And just pushing all the excess right along. So you can see I had enough to turn the corner. And it really does go pretty far. But it gives me the opportunity of being able to add like a lot of detail into an already really detailed frame, where something plain going in there just wouldn't have the same consistency look. So we are gonna do a couple of special things to this little, almost little cameo mold going into the center, because it's plain. It doesn't have any raised features on the inside. So we will add to that. So really super simple. This is actually, I mean, all told, this entire project is super simple. Because the most complicated part is, doing the mold. And that's dead easy. I mean, you know, relive your Play-Doh, Play-Doh and plasticine days, and you're there. So that's the outside frame done. I just want to grab some of my clay and do this inside mold. And then once it's unmolded, we're simply going to glue it into the center. And I'm going to allow it to start to dry up before I attempt to paint it. You can paint the clay when it's wet, but you have to be very careful not to push too hard with your paintbrush so that you don't disturb any of the details, because these are both kind of fairly detailed little molds. I want it to dry a bit so that I'm not going to ruin any of that when I go to paint. And really, there's no reason for me to have to paint it right now beyond my interest and excitement to get it done and see it finished. So I just need to curb my enthusiasm a little and wait patiently for it to dry overnight. All right, so I'm just kind of teasing my little round center mold out. Everything is just kind of falling out and laying down nicely. Look at how beautiful that's gonna be. All right, so that's awesome. And this flat surface in the center, that becomes the piece that we're gonna add actually a little more detail once this baby is all painted up. So what I want to do is flip them both over and get a bit of glue. Now, this is going to be my top because it's got this little peaked ridge to it. And I like using Type Bond 2 or Type Bond 3. I'm good with either, and I use both really pretty interchangeably. It just depends upon what I get. I'm just taking off the little nubbin of glue that always settles there afterward and seals it up. And because I'm going to be laying it down onto a flat surface, I'm not too worried about over gluing. You know, sometimes when you put it on a vertical surface, you have too much glue and it's going to start sliding before that glue has a chance to firm up. When you're doing that, just use a bit of painter's tape to kind of put across the bottom and hold it in place, just so that when the glue firms up, or if you're going to walk away, that you don't come back and find your mold sitting 3 inches lower than you intended it to be. Okay, and now I just want to be a little cautious with it so that, again, I don't stretch it out overly. And then I'm going to raise it, put it in there so it's kind of squared off. Make sure I haven't skewed the edges and that it's nice and centered. And then I'm just wiping off a bit of the excess glue where I slid it, just so that that doesn't show when I go to paint it all. But this is all going to get painted in multiple coats. Awesome. Okay, so that's in there. That looks good. See, look at how that's going to look. So we're going frame, frame, frame. And now we're going to put this kind of cameo into the very center of it. And that's where that last little bit of detail will be that we'll add in there. So again, I'm just handling it delicately so I don't leave a big fingerprint where I mushed part of the detail. Oh, that's gonna be like this. I'm so excited. This is gonna be so cute. This is my first time using the frame mold, and I was really looking to do something a little bit different and fun with it. So that's what we've got. So it's all building up to that little center area, and so cool. So your mold, I just let them dry. So if I have crusty bits of the clay in there, I just let it dry, and then I take a stiff brush and I just brush it out. So don't worry about if you've left behind some of the clay and some of the crevices. Once it dries, it kind of shrinks a little bit. It's easy to clean out afterward. And if I was doing more of them, I would apply more of the cornstarch, which is what's in this little container. So super easy. I'm just gonna leave this sitting for overnight, and then I'll come back at you and we'll get started with doing some of the painting up. This looks dusty, but it's clean. This is actually the finish on it. And we are gonna go metallic at first, only because there's so much detail in this. I want to be able to distress back to some of that metallic. So I also like, because this is very antique-y and we've got so much detail, it's really traditional that would have had the metallics in there, and I don't want to lose that. So we're going to be highlighting all that detail afterward, and so we're going to build to that. So I'm going to set this off to the side, and I'll come back at you when that's dried up, and we'll start painting it up and doing our stuff. I'm so excited. I can't wait. Okay, patience. Our frame and cameo has had the night to be able to dry. And you can see there's a little bit of cracking in there. Now, I don't mind that for the purposes of what I'm doing today, because it's supposed to look aged and weathered, and so when I'm done, you won't really notice those cracks. If you're doing something where you don't want any cracking. You can go and take your air-dried clay and you can fill in those cracks. If they're too tiny, then take a little bit of water. So take some of your clay, put it in a little tiny cup, little tiny dish. Take a paintbrush with, just dip lightly in water and start mixing it around. In essence, what you're creating is, in a pottery world, called slip. So a much softer clay, one that's almost paintable. That will allow you to be able to kind of paint it down into the cracks, be able to fill those, and then just let that dry again. And you'll find that you filled any of those cracking. Again, I don't care. I don't care for this project. Other projects I have, and I have used the slip to great effect. What I want to do is I want to create a nice, even, painted surface over the entire thing in gold. So for this, I'm using DIY golden ticket, and I am just getting it. This is a better mixer. Mine's been sitting for a little bit, so it's very thick on the bottom, very thin on the top. And I'm just gonna get that all mixed up. And I'm just gonna paint the whole thing. So all the surfaces in gold. No exceptions. Because I just want that overall gold look before I go to paint it out white. So we're gonna do gold, and then we're going to paint white over the entire thing, and then be able to distress back to our gold color. So I'm just gonna get this painted in gold, and then I'm gonna come back at you. We've got our frame all done, painted out, 2 coats. I did 2 coats of the golden ticket. You can see that where the glass is, it's a little bit streaky coverage, but that's okay because I'm not going to be distressing there, and because we're going to paint the entire thing out white. Now I'm at the bottom of the barrel of my of my beadboard tin, so we'll see how far this gets me before I have to go and open another one. But I am thinking that I'm going to need 2 coats. Now I'm applying this with just a chip brush because I do want to kind of wiggle it around to get it down into all of those low spots. I'm going to distress, which means all of the high areas are going to be distressed back to the gold. So they're going to be highlighted, which means I definitely want good coverage down in the lows. And some of the little slick areas may need 2 coats just to even it out, and that's okay. I'm actually getting pretty good coverage, so I'm gonna say I need 1.5 coats. But I'm just gonna carry on getting those coats of paint on, letting them dry, and then I'll come back at you when we do the distressing, so you can see what I'm talking about in terms of getting some of that gold highlighted. But now we're kind of lightening it up. Very heavy when it's all gold, but we're gonna lighten it up and then bring back some of the details. Stay tuned. I did end up doing 1 main coat on the frame and then just a little touch-up coat. And now that it's dry, I'm gonna be taking a wet cloth and just doing a little bit of wet distressing. So here what we're doing is we are looking to reveal some of that gold just beneath the surface of the white to be able to highlight some of those details. And I'm just looking at going kind of over the top. We've got all of these great carvings and beadwork, and we're just looking to kind of take the white paint off the very top. And DIY paint is awesome for wet distressing because the paint gets reactivated with water, so it starts to easily be removed. And it's just a little bit easier with something like this than sanding, because I'm not looking at wanting any of my sanding, you know, if I was dry sanding, to soften or take away any of the details of the molding. So you can see the difference that it starts to make in highlighting some of those details. And you want to hit maybe some of the edges of this as well. And it's, you know, if you decide ultimately that you took too much off, just repaint it and start again. So there's no magic to it. I like to go a little bit slowly and just do it sort of lightly around the entire piece, because I have so much detail that that may be enough, rather than going too heavy to begin with. You know, a lot of times I'll go heavier when I just have a little bit of detail, but because there's so much that I'm going to be distressing in this, I may find that just kind of doing a light wet sanding, a light removal will be enough. So I am going to be doing two things at this stage. I am going to wet distress the entire piece and let it dry. And the other little tiny thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some DIY Big Top and I am just going to paint that center oval in the Big Top. I'm not sealing the whole piece yet. I just have another decorative element that I want to add, but I need it to go on the center of my oval, and I need it to go on a sealed surface. That's going to be easiest for it. So I'm going to add just a little bit of that Big Top. Let me just maybe distress the little oval frame around that center section first. And I'll maybe put my Big Top in there so that it can be drying while I'm doing the rest. So I have a little brush. I have my Big Top here. And I am just going to coat that inside oval. I mean, all the rest of the paint is ultimately going to get sealed with whatever the sealer of your choice is. For me, it's probably going to be a clear wax, but you could use the Big Top to seal the whole thing. But I just need that to dry because of the next application of product that I'm going to do. So I'm going to finish distressing, let it all dry, and then come back at you. We're almost done. Okay, now that I've got this distressing, you can see how the details just kind of pop and bring out. And I think that's enough. I didn't go particularly heavy. I said I wasn't, but there's so much detail that I think it's enough. Any more, I think, would be overkill. What I'm looking at doing in that little tiny center, that little medallion center, is take just a little tiny piece of my IOD transfer. This is toile, and I have a little section of this woman sitting that I just want to measure out so it looks like I can just get her head in. And I just want to get rid of some of the excess so that I don't have it going up over the frame. So just kind of looking at trimming her down a little bit. There we go. Now, I had put the sealer on there because IOD transfers are more likely to stick on a sealed dry surface. So you just peel the backing paper off, use the handy dandy little tool that they give you in the kit, and we're just gonna kind of rub it to get that little image to release off of that plastic backing paper. right, I'm just kind of rubbing it in, burnishing it on, making sure that it's fully stuck. And that's where we go. So just nice and simple. That's in a pale gray finish. So it just kind of gives just a little bit of a center to that item that kind of fits in, but it's not overkill. And then I'm going to be sealing with just some clear wax. So I'm using a chip brush for it because I'm kind of working it down into all of those details. And I just find like those longer bristles help me do that. And I don't have to be overly gentle with it because it's an inexpensive little brush. So I'm not too worried about if I destroy the bristles with all of my wiggling and moving. And so I am just going to finish waxing this. I'm going to let it dry, buff it up. I'll take some quick pics so you can see it up close and see what you think. But really, I invite you to consider using like the little frame molds and even the new little cameo molds in some different ways. Think in terms of adding them into projects, the frame within a frame idea, which is just looking super sweet and nice and aged, but there's tons of possibilities with those little molds to be able to help you create something new. Hope it gave you some inspiration. Give it a go, see how it works for you. As always, the paint and supplies are available at queenbeecreationshome.com. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.